Naomi Charles. I'm the CEO and president of SPC Business Consulting, where we do all things government contracts. You can find us on all of the traditional socials. We're on TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, SPC Business Consulting. So today, I'm very excited. We're going to have a little bit of a format change, but we're going to talk about two cases instead of one today. The first being Chevron. We're going to discuss kind of what it is, how it came about, why it's important, and how it affects us. And by us, I mean government contractors. And then we're going to talk about a currently developing case in DC with Councilman Trayon White. We're going to talk about the facts and the issues in the case. We're going to talk about the rules and regulations that are at the meat of the situation, and we're going to talk about possible outcomes. So let's get started talking about Chevron. So I know everyone has kind of had a take on this. What I really want to talk about is the origins of Chevron, how it came about, what the actual case was about, and how it reflects on government contractors. So let's dig into that. So Chevron came about in 1984 when Chevron USA sued the National Resources Defense Council. And the basis of their suit was the Clean Air Act of 1977, which required that states that haven't achieved the national air quality standards set by the EPA establish a state permit program. So their beef was that this permit program used a plant-wide definition for a stationary source for plants that contained several pollution-emitting devices. So in these devices, the stationary source allowed any installation or modification of a device, as long as it didn't increase the total emission, to be counted as a stationary source. So even if the source wasn't stationary before, but it had been modified and didn't emit any extra emissions, they would count that as a stationary source. So when the state ruled that this definition grouped modified devices with non-modified devices. So what was their beef? Their beef was this grouping kind of put everything in a bubble. So if you have brand new devices that had all the bells and whistles, they were effectively in the same bucket as devices that had just kind of been modified to do the bare minimum and not do any and not provide any additional emissions. So they were upset. They went to the Supreme Court and they said, hey, it's too inclusive. It doesn't make any distinction between, superior products who have the top of the line, all the bells and whistles, don't create all of this stuff. You're just allowing them to lump in, these kind of duct taped products together that just don't produce any extra emissions. They're not the same thing. So the Supreme Court found that their beef that the grouping of everything in one bubble was contrary to the law. The Supreme Court found that the term source could be used for either a plant-wide definition or a specific unit within a plant or an entire bubble of equipment and its components. So that was the significant part. It's the entire bubble and its components. So through the years, what has happened is the way Chevron has been used as precedent is that the Supreme Court has said the agency can decide the technical definition of a term used in its programs or in the administration of the agency's activities. So the issue with Chevron being overturned means that is out the window. And when I say out the window, this is what the ruling holds. The ruling holds that the court is required to exercise independent judgment of the agency to decide whether an agency acted in good faith. So what that means is kind of what you've heard parroted on a lot of the talking head shows, is that these agencies that arguably go out of their way to get very technically proficient experts to determine whether something is appropriate or not, these experts are now not going to be the voice of reason. These experts are no longer going to be the arbiters of whether or not this is the right thing to do, or this isn't the right thing to do, or this is how we determine what this means. So effectively, it's like having an English teacher determine the correct calculus formula or the correct physics formula. It's really bizarre, because I think as contractors have learned to lean on the technical expertise of agencies. When there's a disagreement, I understand it this way, the agency understands it this way. It goes to this expert, this technical expert in the field, who then determines, based on their specialized knowledge, what this term means and how this term is applied. So the overturning of Chevron takes this buffer away and effectively puts people, the judges, the courts, who are not technical experts in this area, it puts them in the position of determining what these technical terms mean and how they are applied. So a good example of that is take the astronauts that are kind of stuck, right? When they make it back to Earth, if they decide to sue SpaceX, and this goes to court and there's some disagreement over some technicality, what then happens is an aerospace engineer is not going to be someone who determines whether there is fault. It's going to be a judge who doesn't know the difference in the science and the math calculations that can determine the course of an object or any kind of deficiency the object may have. It's going to be a judge looking at papers, maybe seeing them for the first time in a couple of months. You're only going to get a snippet. You're going to have to rely on the judge to have the mental faculties to be able to interpret what's being put in front of them and to be able to interpret it in the context that it's being submitted. And I think, I'm not saying that judges don't possess the intellect to do that, but what I am saying is that once you have worked in a field, you understand the subtle nuances, you understand the variables that can make what is traditionally a true maxim no longer be true. Like, you understand the outliers, you understand the variables that can throw off an equation. And to take these experts out of the picture and rely on an administrative person who has never done the work, who doesn't understand all of these nuances and all of these things that can potentially make it something it's not supposed to be, is a little scary. And as contractors, we go out of our way to be the experts in what we are doing, or we should be, right? So to have that ripped away from us and put in front of somebody who not only may not understand at all what we do, but doesn't understand the subtle nuances of it, now makes any issues that we have with a project or a technical vehicle really worrisome, because it puts us in a riskier position, because now we have to depend on the interpretation of an administrative person who may or may not have the technical background to understand or to resolve the issue that we're putting in front of them. All right, so it's really interesting. How I think it's going to affect government contractors is that you're going to see a lot of claims. Like, there's going to be a lot of court cases, and I don't think that we're going to be able to see or understand the impact until those cases start rolling out. All right, so on to what's going on in the district now. So here is a quick summation, and again, this is not exhaustive, but this is just kind of giving you an update on what's going on right now. So right now in Ward 8, Councilman Trayon White was arrested, and he was charged in a criminal complaint for bribery and corruption. And so so he's charged under 18 USC 201B2, which is bribery. And what they are alleging They're alleging that Trayon White, who sits on top of the Department of Youth, and I should know this, but you know, I'm sorry, I don't. It's DRYS. I don't really have what the acronym is right off the top of my tongue. Um, but Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. So he sits on top of that committee, and what they're alleging is that he took bribes in order to facilitate contract awards to contractors in the district. They're saying that he took bribes. It looks like one amount that they have settled on is about $35,000. It's not really clear what the total they're coming up with. They say hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've seen reports of over 100,000, and I've seen some say 30. In the official document, in the arrest affidavit, the amounts that they are alleging also vary per contract. Basically, what they're saying, though, in a nutshell, is that he took 3% of the contract value. The contract values were over $5 million. They're saying that he did kind of a pay for play. Is that right? I think it's right. Pay for play for these, and that the contractor came to him and said, "Hey, I want to know what the status of my contracts are. I want to know if I'm going to be awarded this contract, or I want to know if my contract is going to be extended through next year. And if you can tell me which way they're leaning on this, I'm going to give you $15,000 or $10,000 or $25,000." And they're alleging that he did this multiple times. And in the affidavit, there are pictures of him during this conversation. There are pictures of him taking an envelope. Ostensibly, the envelope was filled with $15,000 worth of cash. Those pictures are all included in the arrest affidavit. And what they're citing for this is the district code of conduct, right? So when you're a council member, there are things you're allowed to do and things you're not allowed to do. And what is so frustrating about this situation is that he could have requested a waiver, and he could have recused himself from this business, and he would have created somewhat of a conflict of an organizational conflict of interest barrier there, right? All he had to do was, report to the district that, hey, I sit over this agency. I am involved in awarding the contracts and approving the contracts, and I have been asked by this contractor to have conversations and try to figure out where they are on the contract. And then it would have been appropriate for him to say to the contractor, because these conversations happen all of the time, but what doesn't happen is that the agency official puts pressure to get it solved. When these things are above board and these conversations are happening, because anytime there's a dispute in an agency, it is completely reasonable for a contractor to go to their council person and say, "Hey, can you help me?" What typically happens is the councilman says, or the council person says, "Let me go talk to the agency. Let me get their side. Let me try to understand what's going on, and I'll come back to you." And they go to the agency. They have a conversation, understanding that the agency is under no obligation to speak to them. The agency is under no obligation to entertain a request. The agency is under no obligation to meet with anybody, and the agency is under no obligation to give them any information. So they go and they ask and they say, "Hey, can you tell me what's going on?" And then they'll come back to the contractor and say, "Listen, this is his claim. I can see if they're willing to have a conversation with you, and we can put you two together, and then I'm out." That's typically what happens, because they can't go any further than that. They can't be involved in any negotiations. They can't be involved in any determinations of what's going to happen, particularly if this is the agency that they oversee. So in a typical contracting world, they would say, "I will put in a request to see if they're willing to meet you." And leave it at that. And they would tell the contractor, understanding Maybe they will, maybe they won't. They don't have to, right? And there's not really anything that can be done about that. And what they will try to do, because it's in the best interest of the government, is to get you guys together so that you can start having conversations, right? Sometimes conversations stall. Sometimes people dig their heels in the sand. Sometimes they decide, I'm right, I don't care what you say, I'm right, and I don't want to talk about it any further. But the reality is we all have to work together. So sometimes going to a councilman saying, hey, listen, we're not trying to cause a problem. We just want to talk about this and try to get somewhere. Sometimes you go to the councilman, you say, we just can't get any traction. Is there anything that we can do? Is there anyone else we can talk to? How do we approach it? And they will say, let me see if they're willing to talk to you. Their office will contact the agency. The agency will either say yes or no, and their office will tell you, we tried. No, we tried to get them to come to the table. They said, no, there's nothing else we can do. And that's the end of it. So what they're alleging is that wasn't the end of it with him. They're alleging that he not only made those conversations and had those conversations, but he took those conversations a step further and said, you will do this, or you have to award it to this particular person. This is the person that needs to be awarded this, and was kind of putting pressure on them, which is a problem for a variety of reasons. The first, that he's a district councilman, and in their code of conduct, it says that they're not barred from consultative activities. However, they can only do them if they are consistent with subsection A. They are not otherwise prohibited by law or regulation, which what he did is, and they are conducted outside of regular working hours or at a minimal level during work hours in a manner that does not interfere with the employee's official duties, which obviously he did. And the big thing is that they can't represent another person or have a financial interest or provide assistance, in prosecuting claims. And he just kind of checked all of that stuff. And the big one is he can't accept money. He could have acted as what's the word I want to use? He could have acted as an advocate for this contractor, but he would have had to declare it. He would have had to recuse himself from anything having to do, because one of these is a continuum of care contract. It says grants. They use grants and contract interchangeably, so I'm not really sure. HCA is not a grant, and a human care agreement is not a grant, it's a contract. So they use these interchangeably, so that might be something that comes back to bite them in the end. But they're saying that the total value of all three of the awards that he was involved in was at least $10,702,945.60. What is interesting in this arrest affidavit is that they are charging that, along with White, there is a government employee who was an official in the office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia, a government employee who was an appointed public official in the executive office of the mayor. There is a government employee who was a high-ranking official in ONSE. There is a government employee who was a supervisory grants management specialist at DYRS. So all of these, the companies involved in this, there are 3 companies involved, and they are involved in the Violence Intervention Services in Ward 5, and they specifically were doing violence intervention. They were providing quality assurance, compliant, and fiscal management. And so while they haven't named these people in this arrest affidavit, most of these things are public information. So I'm thinking it's just a matter of time before an intrepid reporter just kind of goes through the contract awards and figure out who who was awarded one of these grants for FY24 to provide assurance, compliance, and fiscal management. And then you have your people named right then and there. It's only a matter of time, but they're saying that the code of official conduct prohibited him from using his position to influence the outcome of matters, which we know in contracts is something you can't do. Like, you can't guarantee someone that they're going to win a contract. You can't guarantee someone that their option year is going to be exercised. You can't guarantee to them that they're going to be the winning bidder. And that is essentially what he did. That is essentially what they are alleging he did. You also can't receive any compensation, salary, contribution, or gratuity from anyone other than DC government. And because he received remuneration from the contractors, he allegedly broke that. They say you can't receive anything of value in return for being influenced in the performance of official acts. They are alleging that he did receive remuneration. They say you can't knowingly use the prestige of office or public position for financial gain, and they're alleging that he did in fact do that, and they have pictures showing that. They are alleging that he disclosed confidential privileged information acquired by his position. So this is procurement integrity. So procurement integrity basically says it's need to know, right? If you are not on the source selection committee, you're not the contracting officer, you're not the contract specialist, you're not the contractor, you don't need to know anything about this, right? And the contractor, your need to know stops once you've submitted a proposal. Everything else is heavily regulated as to how and when you are given information, and the contents of that information is heavily regulated, right? So at the point where he was at, where proposals had been submitted and source selection was ongoing, the vendors had no need to know anything. At that point, there should have been like a cone of silence around what was going on. Nobody should have been sending emails or asking anything, and certainly the contracting officer would not, or the senior grants manager in this case, should not have been having any conversations with anyone regarding any of this stuff, right? You shouldn't even really be having conversations with the OAG or the mayor's office in regards to the status of this, other than it's in selection, it's in evaluation, or proposals have been received and are being reviewed. We've narrowed it down to we're on a short list now. We are making an apparent awardee recommendation. That's the extent of information that they should have, that DYRS should have been giving to ONSC, the mayor's office, and the OAG. They shouldn't have been giving any other information. They should not have been telling them the status. They certainly should not have been telling them who the apparent awardee was. They should not have been telling them who the best performing proposals were. They shouldn't have been doing anything. All of that conversation should have been reserved for the CO and the specialist, or the supervisor, the grants manager, the specialist, and their grants manager. That's who it should have stayed between. It shouldn't have gone any further than that. So I suspect what's going to be found is that they broke procurement integrity. I suspect what is going to be found is that the individuals in the OAG and the mayor's office and ONSC broke procurement integrity. What's going to happen to them? I mean, it depends. Sometimes it's just you're removed from the selection committee, and the bid has to go back out and starts all over again, which is not ideal, but that's generally what would happen. Sometimes it is so severe that, and in this case, I suspect that's what's going to happen. It's so severe that it's canceled. The bid is canceled, and it's kind of thrown back and retooled so that there's no way that anyone can say there was a leg up or anything like that. And I suspect that's what's gonna happen here. I suspect that these alleged companies are gonna be, their contracts are gonna be canceled, and they're gonna be debarred. So it's usually a period between 5 and 7 years. So that means that for 5 to 7 years you won't be able to do any business with the district. That's what I think would happen, if they're found guilty. Of course, we live in America, and they could decide they may have stepped over the line, but it wasn't intentional. In which case, I mean, the worst that would happen in that case is that maybe they're not paid for this period of time where it was where they had to do all of this investigation, but they keep going. You don't know. And I know DC is very different from the federal contracting space. So there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of discretion that OCP has in how they'll deal with this. But the worst case scenario is the contracts are canceled. The solicitation is canceled, and it goes back to the drawing board. It starts all over again. I don't see how that will happen given the budgetary requirement and the funding requirements. The funding source has to be used in this year. So I don't see how that will happen, because we have to be practical here, right? These things have to happen. They may cancel it and do an emergency award to the person who previously held the contract. But I think there are larger things at play than just the criminality of it. So I don't know how they're going to handle it. It will be interesting to see. What I would do is cancel their contract awards and go to the next highest bidder. That is the most efficient and fair thing to do in this instance, and one that would cause the least amount of disruption to the district and to the kids that are being served by this grant. That's what I would do. That's quick and easy. But I don't know the extent to everything that I know what's alleged, but I don't know to the extent of everything that actually happened. So it could be where it's just too egregious, where everything is tainted. And at that point, you have no choice. You have to go back to the drawing board, and you have to start from scratch. I've been on as a senior manager. I have been on the receiving end from the CEO where I had to give the advice that the only way to make this right is to cancel it and start again. Nobody wants to do that. I promise you, nobody wants to do that. Nobody is happy. From me all the way up to the agency director, nobody is happy. But sometimes things are so egregious that you just have to start from a clean slate, and that means canceling everything and starting again. That is scorched earth, last option. But if what they're saying and what I'm reading in this arrest affidavit is just the tip of the iceberg, which I suspect it is, because there's so many different government employees and different agencies involved in this, I think just because of the sheer scope of involvement, they may have no other choice, but it will definitely be an interesting thing to see. So I will keep my eyes and ears open and keep you guys updated on this once I get more information, but definitely shaping up to be an interesting 2024 on this one for sure. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me to listen to me talk about these two cases. And if you have any questions, please send them my way. Any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to have a conversation about them, and I'll keep you posted.